I will be talking to you on behalf of myself and Amalia Banteli, an academic colleague and a co-investigator of a small and still evolving research project called Empathetic Pedagogies, which was initially funded by Welsh School of Architecture and currently by the Education and Innovation Fund scheme here at Cardiff University. Amalia is quite key to the project we'll be talking about because she's not just a teacher of architecture, she's also a performer. It's been almost 20 years since Rob Imbrie argued that in the UK architectural education and practice, human bodies are predominantly visualized as stable, canonical, and normative. Imbrie advocated for an open-ended and flexible design discipline, one that is sensitized to diverse bodies and that transgresses cultural orders. And here we can reflect, on these changes. Things have thankfully changed since then, but we're not sure how radically, though. And here you can see, for example, and from an architectural, a genealogy of bodies popping up in different drawings, up to the 70s and the 80s. Amalia and I were trying to figure out, what we could do about it. Hence, we started looking in the early years of architectural education at mistakes and opportunities that could emerge from that. And we started taking notice of common design pedagogies. So in the early years of architectural education, we invite our students to understand and study the diverse corporealities, either through sensory explorations and bodily surveys of familiar and unfamiliar places, the invention and construction of artifacts, costumes and furniture, and the visual studies of imaginary users. So this is roughly a list of the things we noticed happening in different first years, across the UK. During these activities, architecture often adopts phenomenological lenses and is mainly introduced to students as a cultural condition. The place has a sense and we look into it, not as an apparatus that actively imposes orders. Moreover, the primary medium that we advise students to employ to study these other corporealities is their own body. So these self-referential approaches to design learning unwillingly encourage an understanding of the other as a distorted version of the self. Hence, two opportunities are lost there in our early years, an opportunity to adopt a hetero-referential way of design learning, and an opportunity to acknowledge that first-year students are another transgressive corporeality, a creative alterity, and potentially an empathetic one. We share with you today the knowledge gathered through a modest number of learning alliances between Welsh School of Architecture and Hijinks Inclusive Theatre Company. And while adopting and reflecting on the integration of performing games in design pedagogies, we started to appreciate that performing arts can help us redefine and orchestrate design learning as an othering process, better appreciate the creative challenges that our first-year cohort faces, and plan design principles that in other instances would demand an in-depth engagement with heavy theoretical material and unethical debates, which are often avoided in the early years of architectural education. The concepts of alterity and creativity are brought together in philosophical and sociological discourses in the late 20th century, and gaining distance from the Platonic and Kantian definitions of creativity as a divine inspiration, as a gift, scholars of late modernity define it as a situated, cultural, and occasionally shared practice that transcends or transgresses conventional knowledges. Philosophers of alterity like Emmanuel Levinas and Cornelius Castoriadis, and sociologists like Jean Baudrillard and Marc Guillaume define alterity not as the distorted projection of the self on the other, but as an innovative and transgressive way of being in the world. For Castoriadis in particular, alterity is essentially a creative process that generates infinite qualities and quantities of life forms. Metaphors of transgression support both the conceptualization of creativity and of alterity in relevant literature, and from such a theoretical standpoint, we looked at the pedagogical value of orchestrating creativity as alterity and performing it in the early years of architectural education. The Live Design Unit, Access and Inclusion, barrier or creative tool for performance space design, was designed and led by Amalia and John Duffield-Kidd, the outreach coordinator of Hijinks Inclusive Theatre Company. The two of them developed a theatrical stage set design brief which aimed to bring together first and second year students of architecture with members of two inclusive drama groups, Hijinks Odyssey and Hijinks Telemachus. Hijinks Odyssey is an inclusive drama group with performing adults with and without learning disabilities. And while Telemachus consists of a similar audience, the age range is low, is 16 to 24 years old of performers. Orchestrating creativity as alterity. The design unit was grounded in the live performance needs of two drama groups that were at the time working on an adaptation of the classic children's novel Pinocchio and the Northern Lights. Students and performers were given 2 weeks to experiment and reflect on the design process. In this limited time, students were able to participate in theatrical improvisation, architectural pantomime, experience and observe the needs of hijinks performers, discuss the barriers and limitations that theatrical stage set and stage set designs create for them, and co-invent strategies to address them for 3 separate stage sets. That was from the Pinocchio play. One of them was the Inside the Whale scene, the Geppetto workshop and the fairground. So in particular in week one started with meetings between the students and the performers and literary and visual explorations of relevant precedents. With their unconventional and occasionally naive questions, first-year students opened fundamental discussions on normative perceptions of user, their unique needs and architecture's ability to care for them. Second-year students shared with first-year students their knowledge of representation tools, design analysis and synthesis. And hijinks performers shared their critique on theatrical space and their ambition on their stage set design. During week 2, and while working on the script on these 3 scenes, students and performers exchanged and shared creative routines. At the beginning of each of these meetings, architecture students joined the performance in theatrical improvisation and performing games. Due to the nature of the script, students and performers performed human roles, but they also had to transgress them by enacting puppets, animals, artifacts, and so on, because that's the nature of that particular play. They also engaged in architectural pantomime and collectively enacted a workshop space and a kitchen space and a boat and a forest and a fanfare. By the end of week 2, performers engaged in sketching activities led by students of architecture and tested their ideas on paper through sketches and negotiated their needs as well. And these sleep into my shoes activities helped all creative participants to get to know each other, exchange knowledge, and share the awkwardness and risk-taking that creative thinking entails. With both students and performers engaged in unfamiliar activities, an empathetic bond was built that reminded all participants how strange and uncomfortable creative encounters are, shifting attention from how different we are to what we actually share in that occasion. Access and inclusion unit activities also included a student-led discussion with the hijinks art director at the Welsh Millennium Centre, which was the actual stage, where the final performance would be hosted. In this last meeting, the theatrical stage was revised and revisited and debated as a space designed to prioritize the comfort and pleasure of the audience and not of the performer. Additionally, the swift passage from back to front stage, the threshold between public and hidden action or of theatrical illusion, emerged as particularly challenging for heteronormative corporealities. Lessons, what we learned. Lessons for students. Performing games and improvisations asked architecture students and performers to enact humans like Geppetto, puppets, Pinocchio, animals, donkeys and whales, and plants and trees. During these warm-up exercises, passivity and activity, presence and absence, light and darkness emerged as common metaphors for conceptualizing knowledge and ignorance, life and death, reasons and absence. Where these metaphorical interpretations shaped improvisation games, students were asked to reflect on how metaphors shape cultural predispositions. Students also came to appreciate how volatile and unpredictable normative corporealities can be, not only because they're culturally and historically contingent, but because they're subject to changes across our lifespans. Discussions on the play and with hijinks members, discussing on the play with hijink members, students revealed that alterity is not a permanent state of being prescribed through particular social or cultural categories, but actually it is ubiquitous and volatile and an embodied and situated practice. And this what alerted them and us, to the importance of flexible and inclusive design strategies. Oh, sorry for that. So you can see workshop enactments by the authors.
Sorry.
Okay, we can come back to that, if we have time. So lessons for architectural pantomime revealed the social and cultural qualities we assign to architecture and its elements. Students performing as walls reflected on them as dividing or concealing mechanisms. Students performing as windows reflected on privacy and exposure. Via bodily enactments and improvisation, students asked questions fundamental to the discipline. What are the constitutional differences between a shelter and a prison? When does a threshold operate as a passage, when as a barrier? And the above is just a very short summary, of the discussions that opened up in these sessions, and that, in the design studio and within the frame of our schools, we would need dozens of heavy readings, theoretical readings to open up, with a first-year student. Okay.
Right, so let's time at the moment in here. What do we think? Who do we think is what? What's going on? Come in here.
So they've built a house here and they're navigating it.
I think this is right.
I'll go through there as well.
Lessons for tutors. The first year of architectural education and its learning routines offer admittedly more time for trial and error, experimentation and failure. This is the year that the design process is taught and is prioritized. Assessment does not impact degree classification and timetables feel less packed. As such, tutors and students can freely experiment with design tools and explore the boundaries of the discipline, worrying less about their final design outputs. Moreover, first-year small-scale briefs offer opportunities for in-depth study of unstable corporealities. Such exercises are more challenging to embed in second and third-year design briefs, that they often prescribe the design of large-scale and complex projects. Additionally, because architectural conventions and manières are not yet established, first-year students are in a better place to approach the creative process in unconventional ways, ask uncommon questions, bring new tools and methods in the process. Hence, transdisciplinarity and performing pedagogies are better embedded in first-year design curricula. The Access and Inclusion Design Unit helped us look back at first-year students' creative encounters and reinterpret them as a reception to an unfamiliar, risky, and occasionally hostile territory. By extension, it helped us reflect on how we can better support them by amending and tuning and orchestrating these transgressions as novel, intuitive, creative, and unprecedented passages to design thinking. In the early years of design learning, we lose a unique opportunity to adopt a heteroreferential way to engage with our diverse, volatile, and unpredictable corporealities and understand how design impacts or defines them. This pedagogical critique is aligned with philosophical ones to early phenomenological traditions initiated by Levinas and later by Castoriadis. These suggest that early phenomenological approaches represent the imperialism of the same, and I'm quoting the authors here, and are self-referential and very narrow-minded as well. And they invite us to engage with the other as a distorted reflection of our creative self. In Castoriadis' ethical advocations, alterity is introduced as an ontology of the other, in which indeterminacy and novelty are actually tightly connected. Performing pedagogies can promote empathetic learning not only between tutors and students, but also between students and the diverse and volatile bodies that architecture serves. They encourage us to establish connections with other creative practices and communities and provide a strong introduction of students to architecture, to ethical and aesthetical design principles as essential conditions of creative and playful learning. And that's it. And